how can there be reason if our mind is just a causal process that has evolved through evolution? Or more specifically, how can there be a reasonable reason, or how can we trust reason if it has just been this process of gradual development where a lot of random events has happened? Can we trust our thinking if it is a result of evolution? Of course, you can always be super skeptical and say maybe everything is a dream and maybe we are brains in vats, etc. But it's not this overall skeptical question we're asking here. It's a more precise one. Let's say we accept the evolutionary theory of how brains have evolved, etc. Does that imply then that we should be skeptical towards reason, that we shouldn't trust what evolution has produced as our capacity for reason? Let's first look at someone who says no, we should not trust reason if it's a result of evolution. For instance, philosopher Alvin Plantinga says that we have no reason to trust our own thinking if it has evolved through natural evolution, because the evolution only cares about survival and not about truth. So, of course, there's an obvious reply or objection to that objection, which is that, well, isn't it good for survival that we are interested in what is true? And of course Plantinga has thought of that, so he says no, because you can have a lot of examples of how believing something false could nevertheless be good for survival. So let's say there's a lion, and I think that lions, I should be, if I see a lion, I should cuddle it. And I believe that to cuddle a lion means to run away from it, so I run away. Then these are clearly false beliefs, but it's still good for survival that you run away from the lion. So that's how he replies. Now, of course, it's possible to make up examples like this, but it's not so plausible that you could have this systematic, complete theory of the world where everything is wrong and still it's very good for survival. It's much easier to think that a theory which is quite close to truth is also better fit for survival than a systematically wrong theory. But there is another person called Donald Hoffman who has suggested this evolutionary argument against reality, trying to make a better case that we should be skeptical to whether our reason has in fact a good understanding of reality. And his example is how, if you imagine a PC or computer, you have these icons, so if you want to store a document, you can drag it into one box, or if you want to throw it in the garbage, you can drag it into a garbage can, etc. And this is just very simple icons describing what's happening, but it's something very complex happening inside the computer that we have no understanding of if you're not a computer scientist. And he says we could have good reason to believe it's the same way with reality, that our brains have given us a very simplified version of the world, which is useful for survival, but in reality it's very different and very much more complex, etc. So that we might have a good reason to be skeptical towards whether we actually have a good understanding of reality. So this would be then reasons to be skeptical to reason. But I'm going to suggest that we can trust reason, so I'm going to answer yes. But how can that then be defended? Well, first I think we should make a distinction between, are we talking now about what is a reasonable argument? When we talk about reason, is it arguments that are thought to be reasonable or not? Or is it, are we talking about individuals who are reasoning? Because when it comes to individuals who are reasoning, there are of course a lot of differences, and we know that there are certain general features of how humans usually reason that are not very reasonable, aren't very smart. Daniel Kahneman is one who has shown plenty of examples of this, how our brain takes all sorts of shortcuts because that's usually useful, but in many concrete cases that will lead you astray and make you reason in irrational ways. That fits very well with reasoning having evolved through evolution, that these general shortcuts that often work well would survive and evolve, even if they aren't always very reasonable. But it's something else with the sort of science of logic and reason, which has developed since Aristotle, and testing and finding out here are some certain deductive arguments that always give a true conclusion. Here are other good argument structures. This is a science that has been tested for thousands of years and stood up well to scrutiny, and so that's why we have gotten a good reason to believe in it. And that means also that we have sort of this science of what is reasonable. Philosophy of science, philosophy of, and logic, etc., that we can use then as a standard to consider or evaluate whether a specific individual is being reasonable or not. We can show what is wrong, what's the fallacy in the reasoning, etc. Still, one could say, okay, you make an argument that logic and the science of reason is reasonable, but can we trust that then? Because we are still humans and we have evolved, so maybe our brains, we think that logic is very smart and logical, and we think that reason is reasonable, and still we could be wrong in this evaluation. Then there's an argument to believe that we aren't wrong, we are quite close to truth, and that's the no miracle arguments, suggested by, among others, Hilary Putnam. And the argument is that humans have developed a lot of well-functioning technology, and so when we have done theories about electrons, theories about gravity, etc., that makes it possible to make technology that allows us to fly to the moon or to make a phone call to Africa, etc., then that gives us a good reason to believe that the theories about electrons and gravity are at least quite close to truth. Maybe they're replaced with better theories in the future, but they will be quite structurally similar to the old theories. It would be a miracle if the theory was completely wrong and still we were able to land on the moon or call to Africa, etc. So this gives us a good reason then to believe that our theories are approximately true, at least, so that we can trust our reason. Of course, you could again go super skeptic and say, well, but maybe that's just because we're dreaming that we fly to the moon, or we are brains in vats, we're being fooled to believe that we can make phone calls to Africa. But that again would be the sort of super skeptical argument that you can make a million different variants of, but we have no reason to believe that it's true. We have this the no miracle arguments and the technology, etc., gives us reason to believe that we have quite good theories and quite good understanding of the world, even if there could, of course, still be much more to learn. We have reason to believe that we have gotten closer to truth, but we don't know how far it is to the final truth. So still, of course, reason to be humble, but nevertheless also reason to believe that quite much of what we believe is actually true. If we accept then that reason is reasonable, one could use that as an argument against evolution and say, well, evolution couldn't have brought this forth, so that shows that we must be either rational souls coming from the Platonic world of ideas, or God has given us divine reason, etc. But we have looked now through many videos on how brains, neurons, how simple dispositions, etc., could evolve and become more and more gradually complex, and how reasoning could function in the brain. And also the fact that there is a lot of poor reasoning going on also suggests that it has evolved through evolution instead of being a rational soul or a divine reason. We are going to continue also looking at how the reasoning in the brain and how brains got connected to consciousness in the next video. In the next videos, because now we are moving on to chapter 7, which is on the topic of consciousness.